Neil Ross, Associate Director of Policy for Tech UK. Thank you so much for being here at Cambridge Tech Week. And in fact, just coming off chairing the really interesting panel on semiconductor and Cambridge's role in that and the strategy for the UK. So first of all, how have you found it, Cambridge Tech Week?
It's been great. I think it's great to see sort of so many different tech weeks pop up around the country. You know, you have Manchester Tech Week, Birmingham Tech Week, obviously London Tech Week. But I think this is the first Cambridge Tech Week, and it's sort of interesting that it hasn't happened before, given such the sort of high esteem that Cambridge in the UK is held among the tech community and the incredibly thriving ecosystem we have here. I think that was really well represented by the panel we were on today. You know, we had Jamie, who had a long history in the semiconductor industry, Raj, who worked for a big global company, and then two kind of really important growing companies here, which I think was a sort of a great representative of the city and the area and the tech ecosystem that exists here.
So you had Raj from Samsung, you had Simon Thomas from Paragraph, and you had Karen O'Brien from Qbus, thank you, and Jamie, who's done everything, including co-founder of Arm. So a really interesting panel. And how do you see how Cambridge sits within that national landscape? Your Tech UK is obviously a national organisation representing tech companies across the UK. How do you see Cambridge's role in playing in that?
Cambridge is one of the premier destinations in the UK for investment in the tech sector. I think you saw, particularly from the remarks that both Caroline and Simon gave about just why they're here and the importance of it, the access to talent, the business advice, the ecosystem that it kind of thrives around. It's an amazing place and has grown phenomenally in the last few years. You know, there's a lot of discussion in government and around now about sort of levelling up, and that's really, really important, but you can't sort of level down at the same time, as well as investing in places like, the Northeast, the Northwest, other parts of the UK that maybe don't have such an established cluster as Cambridge. You also need to double down on where you've got strengths, and Cambridge is definitely one of those places.
Well, I think playing to the strengths is probably a sensible part of a national strategy, and doubling down, as you said. So talking about national strategies, Cambridge Tech Week, we've got probably four main technology streams and themes through the week: quantum, AI, semiconductor, and wireless infrastructure.
Yep.
4 of the 5 strategies that the new Department for Science and Industry and Technology is focusing on. Yep. Coincidental, but I guess it shows that Cambridge has a right to speak in most of the important areas in that strategy. Talking about the semiconductor strategy, which we are waiting for.
Yep.
You had some interesting inputs from the panel. Would you like to reflect on what was said?
Yeah, I think it was an interesting feature from that panel was that they probably want more of a roadmap than a strategy. There were some sort of fundamental blockers to growing a semiconductor company in the UK. Skills was one of them, infrastructure was one of them, investment was one, but also kind of regulation, whether that's trade agreements or national security regulation. So those seem to be the 4 things that popped up for everyone as being, we need to solve these problems now. But actually after that, they were much more willing to kind of think, well, we need to take this a bit more high level, think about, not be as directive, but think about the potential opportunities and work it out as we go along, rather than have a kind of a strategy that sort of seeks to predict the next 20 years all on a tight bow. And I think the other thing that kind of stemmed from that was they don't want the strategy to be published and that's sort of the end, and they'll disband their groups and stop talking to government. They want the strategy to really be the kind of beginning of the journey as opposed to the end.
Yeah, out of those 4, that last one, talking about regulation, I heard the word friction.
Yes.
Remove friction, particularly from trade, from Jamie and some of the others. And also from Jamie, yes, it's good to have a vision, but it's also good to know where you are now and what steps the country wants to take. What is that strategy to take us there? And I think I heard from the smaller companies, actually after that, get out of the way, let us do it.
Absolutely. I think another thing that came out of that is we've spent a lot of time, I think, in the media and on politicians, etc., slightly obsessing over what's going to be in the semiconductor strategy. And as Jamie pointed out on the panel, the semiconductor strategy is important, but it's not everything. And we need to be thinking about the kind of general business conditions for these companies and then take a step back and think, well, how is the industry evolving and where can you kind of offer support as it grows? Because you just aren't going to be able to predict what's going to happen in that industry over the next 5 and 10 years.
Well, I think we heard from Caroline, the strategy's not going to be perfect. It's great they're doing something. Let's understand what it is. And to Simon's point of view, let's have clarity.
Yeah, absolutely.
reflecting on that, we've had here with day 2 of a 3 days of core conference and debates tomorrow. What do you think Cambridge Tech Week should evolve to? You know, we're starting to think about Cambridge Tech Week next year. The things that we, from an outsider's point of view, look at it and say, well, that was great, but what else should you do?
One of the things, just to reflect on the panel that I was on, someone came up to us afterwards and said, it was really good to hear such a consistent view from people with different perspectives across the industry. And that's something that Cambridge Tech Week could probably kind of take from and evolve into is, can you, through the Tech Week every year, deliver a core set of messages to businesses, to government and to people about what Cambridge is about, what kind of opportunities are here for businesses and individuals, but what extra support does the government need to give Cambridge to continue to grow? You know, planning permission, the Oxford-Cambridge arc. There's been big national conversations about things that are holding Cambridge back. And there's, I think, a need to kind of keep pushing government to kind of give that kind of support where needed, as well as doing the stuff that Cambridge does best and attracting the best and brightest people as well as companies.
Yeah, but even there, you know, the subject of talent has cropped up time and time again the last 2 days, and not just the postdocs and the really clever scientists. It's technicians, sales and marketing, people who can commercialise the tech into something that can scale.
Yeah. Look, I don't think the tech industry is ever going to solve its talent problem, where there is a global shortage and everyone is competing for a limited supply. The aim is to just keep doing better and to make the UK, Cambridge and destinations a really attractive place to live. And there's 2 parts to that. There's, first of all, the opportunities and the companies and the infrastructure, but then there's also making Cambridge and other places a nice place to live. And that's something that Cambridge has a really strong advantage in. People do want to move here. It's a great place to live. There are good living standards. There's good culture, restaurants, etc. So there's all that side of it as well.
As well as a great network. And we've heard on some of the other sessions today that the power of the networks here, whether it's professional networks, even social networks, that allow people to collaborate and figure out who to work with or talk to if they're building a business or growing a business.
Yeah. No, absolutely. And that's how you know you've become a really strong hub, is when people talk about the kind of ecosystem effects. That's what lots of other places around the UK are trying to get to. Cambridge is sort of already there and has to think, well, how do we take this to the kind of next level?
Well, Neil, thank you so much for joining us at Cambridge Tech Week and beautifully chairing the semiconductor panel. And thanks for coming.
No, brilliant. Thank you very much.